a former city and government reporter in Mexico, spoke to us about the journalist's role in questioning government's actions.
Es muy importante porque finalmente es la voz de la ciudadanía, es la voz de la sociedad para cuestionar las acciones del gobierno. Básicamente, es quien pone bajo el ojo del ciudadano las acciones que hace el gobierno.
The conglomeration has caused independent journalists to face the financial strain.
Sí hay un problema, porque si no estás en estas grandes compañías que te pagan un salario, es muy difícil hacer periodismo. ¿Quién paga tu salario? ¿Quién te paga que puedas ir, tomar un avión o un autobús para ir a un lugar y hacer un reportaje? Tienes que tener ese apoyo económico, pero si no lo tienes es complicado.
Even with financial backing, stories journalists may want to cover have to take a back seat. The advertising business model many companies use to keep the lights on emphasizes clicks over content.
Journalists are going to have to walk the line between doing nothing but Taylor Swift stories and then also doing City Hall stories. And we need those City Hall stories. I'm not saying that we don't want to and we should never, ever do the Taylor Swift stories. But we can't live on Cheetos. We need our vegetables.
Trent Lamb, TSTV News.
When we come back, we speak to our panelists with varying perspectives from across the journalism industry. They'll give us insight into media ethics, the changing landscape of journalism, and where they think it should go in the future. So stay tuned.
Thirteen of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth.
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. I'm here with our panelists who will be discussing where journalism is today. We have a wide variety of perspectives with us tonight. Starting on the far right, we have Ryan Chandler. Ryan is a KXAN reporter where he reports on politics and Texas for Nexstar's 14 stations across the state. Ryan is also a UT, TSTV, and Tower Talks alumnus. Welcome back to the studio. How does it feel to be back?
I've been gone, 3 years, and it looks pretty similar, so.
Right.
Y'all are still doing great.
It's great to hear. Next we have Mihir Gokhale. Mihir is currently serving as Associate Opinion Editor for the Daily Texan and is a former Associate Managing Editor. He is also a blog editor at the Texas Undergraduate Law Journal. Welcome to the TSTV floor of the Texas Student Media Building, Mihir. What's it like to be out of the basement and in these incredibly bright lights?
Very new. It's a new feeling. Never been out here, but I'm excited, yeah.
Hopefully a good new feeling?
Good new feeling, yes.
That's great. That's great to hear. And our final panelist is Professor Emily Quigley. Professor Quigley is an instructor in the School of Journalism and Media and Associate Director of the Moody Writing Support Program at UT Austin. She has also worked in various editorial roles at the Austin American Statesman, and she helped create the curriculum for ethical leadership in news, which we will talk about later. A resource created by the Moody College. How are you doing this evening, Professor?
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have all of you here. I wanted to start with sort of a broad question, sort of simple, but maybe deceivingly simple. So we'll come to you first. Professor Quigley, you have a lot of experience in the journalism industry, but also with students here in the classroom teaching, hopefully the next generation of journalists. So my deceivingly simple question is, why is journalism important?
You know, I think journalism is important to make sure that we have a functioning society. Journalists are able to give people information they might not be able to get otherwise. They're able to shine a light on things that need to be spotlighted. And I think that one of our tasks going into the future that I tell my students is that we need to make sure that people understand that importance of journalism so that they will realize that it is an important thing for them to have in their life.
I might be biased, but I completely agree. Well, from the classroom and to the news, Ryan, you work in broadcast journalism covering the state of Texas. So from your perspective, why is journalism important?
Well, especially in the state of Texas, I'll localize it a little bit. Texas is at the forefront of every change in this country. In just a few decades, we will be the most populous country, or we used to be a country, the most populous state, the most diverse state that has an outsized influence on not just regional politics, but national politics and really the state of the entire world. But we have really subpar voter turnout, poor education, and those two things do not mix well. So in order for us to really be a leader and to make good decisions for the rest of the country and the thousands of people that move to Texas every year, we need to be informed about the state of our state and have those opinions formed in an informed way when we go to the ballot box. So I don't think there's a better place in the country to be doing journalism right now, because so many of the important policies and decisions are being made here, and our voters should be more active and more informed.
That's interesting. I like how you brought it directly to how it affects us. Mihir, you have a different perspective from the rest of us. You're in a room full of journalism majors, but you are a business major. So how did you find the Daily Texan, and why do you think it's important from your perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, I always knew I wanted to write. I love to write, and I wanted something that was more free-flowing, so I feel like I gravitated to the newspaper almost naturally. And the opinion department specifically really appealed to me because I feel like I can write on things that are more pertinent to the campus community, but also just tied into that broader love I have for writing and advocating for different communities, people, perspectives on campus through opinion writing is really a very powerful caveat of journalism. And I feel like I bring a very unique perspective as a business major. So, yeah.
Is there a specific issue on campus that you've found to highlight?
I really love writing about structural issues. So, for example, I wrote a column last year on renovating Creekside Residence Hall, which is one of UT's oldest dorms on campus. So I'm very big on highlighting anything that is really just structural based on campus. If it's like, you know, like dorms, for example, water stations, things like that, I'm very passionate about writing on.
It's really interesting. You'll have to send me that column.
Yeah.
Moving into our first major topic, looking at ethics within the newsroom first. Professor Quigley, we spoke earlier about how you developed the curriculum for ethical leadership in news. Could you talk to us about what exactly that is?
Yes, so I was invited to work on that project by Kathleen McElroy, who then was the director of the School of Journalism and Media at Moody College, as well as Mimi Drumright, who is head of the Communication and Leadership Certificate. And they were working with some other folks to create a free curriculum that could help create better newsroom leaders going into the future. Because those of us who worked in newsrooms many years ago knew that that environment was not always the best environment. It was a very machismo environment. It was very much just, you know, suck it up and fake it till you make it type thing. And in recent years, with all of the problems that we've had retaining good journalists in newsrooms, people have started to realize maybe that's not the best way to keep a good workforce, is by treating them poorly. You know, we already have long hours. We have to deal with breaking news, with stressful subjects, so how can we better support the people that are doing that important work? So the curriculum is free, that newsrooms or classrooms can use to help create the next generation of leaders to just have a better supportive workplace.
Are there any specific main topics that you focus on for creating those better leaders?
You know, some of it has to do with things that you might think are obvious about just how to treat people with respect and kindness. But, you know, sometimes that gets lost in the busyness of everyday news gathering, and people are stressed out and tensions get high, and we sort of throw out our manners sometimes. So some of it is that. Some of it is thinking about how we cover all the different communities that are within our coverage area. How do we do that with respect and making sure that we are representing them all fairly? Because being ethical newsroom leaders not only is how you treat the people that you work with, but also how you treat the people that are reading or watching your news.
It's really interesting. So moving to someone working within the newsroom, how do you see these types of issues affecting your reporting?
I've experienced many of the issues that you spoke about. Yeah, I think everybody should know before entering the business that it's not an easy one. You will have early mornings and very late nights. Your schedule is decided by the whims of breaking news many times. And that's frankly what I love about this job, because no day is the same. It's always exciting. But that can lead to a lot of burnout. I will say, I think the culture of burnout and the idea that you need to work and climb your way up from the bottom and not make any money is working its way out the door. I have found in my experience that all of my superiors and news directors have been nothing but compassionate and understanding and supportive of somebody who's relatively new to the industry and is still getting their feet under them. So I would say, you know, though that culture of being in a newsroom is something you should be aware of, but not necessarily something that should discourage you from getting into an environment like that. Because again, it can be fun if you're looking for a fast-paced environment and rewarding job like that.
So it sounds like things are improving for the better.
As a whole, I would say that the probably the lifestyle and the quality of life for a new journalist today, again, this is speaking very broadly, but it is probably better than it was a few decades ago, where I understand just the culture of, you know, burnout and making you earn your stripes is probably more, and frankly just less inclusive overall, where there were, you know, less opportunities for a lot of kinds of people to get into the newsroom. I think, at least from what I've seen in my newsrooms, it's very diverse, and there are a lot of opportunities to advance.
Well, I'm sure everyone in the room is happy to hear that. Mihir, moving to you, you were in a leadership position and still are at the Daily Texan. So how do you approach these types of issues?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. At the Texan, we're very good with, you know, like managing burnout, just making sure that everyone has that communicative thread with everyone else to make sure there's not really people who are too stressed out. We can bring as many people into the conversation as possible. I know last summer as associate managing editor, we did a pretty good job of like collaborating with all the other department heads, making sure that they were involved, they knew what was going on and how to go about it. And I feel like I still do that as an associate opinion editor. I'm very involved with all of my individual columnists, just checking in with them, trying to make sure that they're as immersed in the department as possible, but also so that they have their own time to themselves, they can carve out a space for themselves.
That's great to hear.
Yep.
Ryan, coming back to you on the flip side, we're talking about internally with journalism, but we also have an effect on the readers that watch or that listen to us. So you cover a lot of very sensitive political topics. What is your approach to covering these things in an ethical way?
Well,
kind of a big question.
It's a very big question, and I think the first thing that journalists need to accept is that everybody approaches anything they do in life with preconceived bias. Nobody is free of political opinions, right? We all have them, but the reason journalism is not a hobby but a profession is you learn to leave those at the door and approach topics with an open mind, going out of your way to include various perspectives. I know that I've done a good job with a story when I get angry emails from liberals and conservatives. The conservatives will call you a liberal hack, and the liberal will say that you gave way too much time to that Republican lawmaker. And usually that's how you can tell that you did a pretty balanced job with the story, because you may disagree with a viewpoint that is part of the debate, but if it is truly an influential part of this policy discussion that is influencing the larger conversation in the public, it's your responsibility to include it. It's not your responsibility to give a voice to inaccuracies. If somebody advocates for a position that is factually untrue, it's your responsibility to call that out or just not include it. But you need to give deference to people's good faith opinions and include them even if they're controversial or you personally disagree with them. That's at the Texas Capitol, I do that every day.
Awesome. So moving from practicing in the industry to teaching in the classroom, Professor Quigley, you teach the intro writing class. This is a lot of students' first experience writing on these types of topics. So what's your approach to teaching students how to cover these things in an ethical way?
I think that going along with what Ryan was saying, teaching students to recognize what all of our inherent biases are, because yes, we all have, that's what makes us people, and you need to realize what those are so that you can learn to make sure they're not affecting your reporting. And always just thinking about, how can I get at the truth of this story? What are the facts of this story? Because it is news writing is what I'm teaching, so it's not opinion. And so it is very much just staying true to the idea of, these are the facts that I can give to the reader. This is as much information as I know. Here is what we don't know at this point, so that the reader has that information and can learn from that.
That's interesting. So moving to opinion, it's almost more dangerous to cover these types of topics. So how do you approach that with your new reporters? How do you guide them in that process?
Yeah, so I mean, political topics are definitely a more sensitive area. We have to really train them to kind of take as nuanced of a take as possible. Even if they have an angle that is inherent to their story that they're trying to push, we want to make sure that they're covering the other side and doing due diligence to source from that perspective. So for example, if we're covering something that is inherently more left-leaning with a left-leaning argument, we want to make sure that we're still sourcing from, maybe the right-leaning side as well as the left-leaning side. Even if the right-leaning side doesn't necessarily respond, we want to make it our duty to reach out to them and make that first contact and that first step, just so we have both sides in the conversation.
Awesome. So drawing from both sides, a common theme, of course, throughout. So that is the end of our first section of the panel. When we come back, we'll talk about the evolution of journalism, the industry, the current digital age, and where Ryan, Mihir, and Professor Quigley think the industry should head in the future. More from our panelists coming up on Tower Talks.
"13 of the 48 club sports offered by the university now require students to submit proof of sex assigned at birth."
I know deep down they would probably want to stay with the university.
No way in hell anybody's going to tell my daughters what to do with their bodies.
This state is one of the worst in child education.
We can't take it anymore, seeing those scenes.
Going to Hillel on Friday night, all my family members kept texting me not to go.
There's a huge housing crisis in Austin. Do you have a plan in place to address this issue? Determined to start your day well? We're up bright and early. From the enriching local stories to the weather forecast later in the day. Rain or shine, at Good Morning Longhorns, we got you covered. Comprised of a studious reporting staff going lengths to get that scoop, and a talented technical team to enhance your screen visually. As a fellow Longhorn, your mornings are better with us. So start your day the Vivo way. Good Morning Longhorns, Wednesdays at 7 a.m. Central Time on TSTV.
Welcome back to Tower Talks. For those of us joining us now, we are talking to our panel about journalism and the media industry. From right to left, we have Ryan Chandler from KXAN, Mihir Gokhale from the Daily Texan, and Professor Emily Quigley from the School of Journalism and Media right here at UT Austin. So moving into our next section, journalism is a constantly evolving industry with how people get their news. We've gone from print to broadcast to now the digital age on social media, and it feels like we've almost come full circle from a paper on your door to that newsletter in your inbox. So coming first to you, Professor Quigley, what changes have you seen during your time in the journalism industry, and are they good changes?
Well, I've seen a lot of changes because when I was in journalism school, my final project that I did was at an internship where I created a wiki for the copy desk to use to be able to fact check information because there was no Google back then. So there have been a lot of changes over the years, but I think that a lot of them, unfortunately, have not been good changes. We have seen, trust in the media drop. We have seen the rise in misinformation drowning out good journalism. And I think that that is the challenge that we need to address as an industry, and that I try to talk with my students about, is how can we improve these things and make sure that people understand the importance of journalism. And I think that some of those changes need to happen within the industry. We talked about ethics. We need to be better at adapting to new technologies because journalism outlets have been very slow to that in the past. And then I think we need to look at changes within society about increasing media literacy in our schools so that people will understand what news is and why it's important.
So speaking on adapting to newer things, Ryan, you're very active on Twitter, or on X, I'm sorry.
Maybe too much so, yes.
Constantly delivering the news as it happens. Why do you think that's important to do?
That is the biggest benefit of Twitter. I'm still going to call it Twitter. Sorry, I'm not around to X yet. Yeah, everything happens immediately on Twitter. You don't have to wait, but that's the danger. And I think journalists as a profession are too beholden to fast-acting social media like that. I feel like a lot of the time when a journalist tweets, they're just talking to other journalists or other people who are already in the know. It's kind of like professionals talking to each other. And you have to realize if you are going to use something like Twitter, a vast majority of Americans are not on there, and if that's the only thing you use to disseminate your message, then you're missing a lot of people. So it is useful to get news out as soon as it happens, but I've been trying to make an effort, and I think other journalists should as well, to de-emphasize your activity on Twitter and put a little more depth and more effort into the broadcast and the digital story and the things that will reach a broader audience.
So do you think it's best to move away from Twitter, or just start Twitter and then move to other places as well?
You don't have to move away from it. Just include it as a wider news diet and use it as one platform to share your message. Ideally, it should be on everything, really, because each social media app kind of caters to a different demographic, and you may have different followers here than there. The goal should always to be spread your message as far as you can, right? Because if it's helpful information, you want that to get to everybody. Twitter doesn't do that.
So, Mihir, coming to you, where do you think the future of the journalism industry is headed in terms of the constant evolution of how people are getting their news?
I mean, it's definitely become more modular, right? Like, it's packaged into these bite-sized pieces nowadays, and I feel like that's only going to increase as time goes on. Like, it's already been, like what was said previously, it's pushed on, like, Twitter, these social forums, and I feel like that's only going to increase as time goes on. It's going to become as quick as possible, where people just get the sound bites and move on, which can also be a dangerous thing because that precludes them from getting the full view of the story, and it just gives them the highlights. But I think that is inevitably where I see it going as we move into like this information age.
Interesting. Yeah. So moving into our final question, it's kind of along the same lines. I'm going to give all of you the same question this time. So journalists recently have come under fire for the way that they cover things, the things that they cover, both recently and just generally. This is, I think, a trend sometimes with with journalism. So starting with you, Ryan, and we'll just move down the line. What improvements, if any, have you seen in journalism, and what improvements do you think need to be made in the future?
Well, I haven't been doing this that long, so I am sure you can provide a lot more context here. But, you know, I think it goes to, you know, what, Mihir, you said about the sound bites and the quick explanations. That is something that is especially relevant in TV, because every day I have 90 seconds to tell a story. And I used to think that was no time at all to get the point across, but if you do it right, you can distill the core facts down to what people really need to know. And that makes every second that you use of people's time that much more important. And I think that in my personal experience, I've gotten a lot better and learned what the important facts are, what is noise, and distilling it down into the most important parts. I think a lot of people, to your point, could criticize journalists for the stories that they choose to cover and choose not to. And I think in those circumstances, you need to remember that these are people who consume and report news for a living, and our job is to filter out the facts from the fiction and the import from the noise. So a lot of times when we choose not to cover a story that may be circulating on social media that day, it's because it doesn't fit into, you know, the bigger picture and what's important, and we don't want to waste our viewers' time. So as you continue to do this job, I think you develop a keener sense for what is a distraction and what is real news.
Moving to you, Mihir, same question. What improvements, if any, have you seen, and what do you think should be made in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely been like this overall awareness of what biases are projected onto media and have been in the past, and I feel like people are becoming more cognizant of this when they write or when they disseminate this media nowadays. And I feel like that is one very good thing that's just going to keep continuing in the trajectory of journalism as we move forward. More people growing more aware of how to be more inclusive of different perspectives, and avoiding that trap of just sourcing from one perspective or sourcing from one side, and growing more just in general cognizant of how to bring as many people into the conversation as possible. So I think we're only going to see that increase.
Awesome. And same question to you, Professor Quigley.
I think that there are a lot of different ways to answer this, and I want to focus on one area that's very important right now in Texas and will be in the next year nationally, is politics. And I think that some news outlets have started doing a much better job of talking about the issues and what's going on behind the races rather than just the polls and the personalities and the horse race of elections. And I would like to see much more of that, because I think that's what's valuable to our audience.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for coming on and for sharing all of your perspectives. We really enjoyed hearing from you today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Well, last week, TSTV News reporter Ryan Chandler sat down with Professor Diana Dawson on the future of journalism. They talked about AI, they talked about the 24-hour news cycle and the news diet. So let's take a look at that.
I tell everybody that kind of the fuel to my teaching is my love for the profession and my belief in its importance. I think that as long as we have a democracy, we must have journalism and we must have journalists. The world needs its news. We need to hold power accountable. And so we have to find ways to keep journalism healthy and vibrant and meaningful going forward, no matter what that takes.
With social media and the 24-hour news cycle and the prevalence of news in our everyday lives as journalists and as consumers, it can be easy for consumers and journalists to feel overwhelmed or disillusioned. So how do student journalists prevent that? How do they keep their passion for the profession alive even when they're constantly covering terrible news stories?
Even though I teach journalism, I was a journalist for a long time, I am a huge fan of the profession and love to consume as much as possible. I cut myself off at 6 p.m. and it's like, that's it. I will keep up with the news all day. Now, if something terrible is breaking and I hear about that, I might bend my own rules a little bit, but I try to put myself on a news diet and then read something totally different in the evening. Read maybe I can transition to a, narrative magazine piece or to fiction, something like that. Listen to music, play with my dog. And I advise other people to do the same. You have to step away. You have to advocate for a little bit more balance in your life, because if you're constantly absorbing just the rough stuff in the world, it takes its toll on you. So also look for the happy stories and kind of add one of those into the mix every now and again. There are people out there who are doing great things to make the world a better place, and solutions journalism goes in that direction of taking a look at what can we do, how can we fix problems, and that can kind of buoy you and give you a little bit more journalistic resilience.
And kind of switching gears a little bit into the world of journalism and how the business model is evolving. I know there's a lot of fears of AI maybe taking over positions or what that means for journalism. Do you have any opinions on how we might see that integrating into the world soon?
I think that's one of the next changes coming around the bend. And I'm sure there are ways in which AI will be helpful to journalists. I'm not exactly sure what they are right now. I know one of our professors has a project in which he has created an online publication that's with student workers that's completely AI generated, just to see how could we use it. And I think we will be able to generate headlines that mesh well with search engine optimization and that kind of thing. Maybe it's a good, quick way to grab paragraphs of history or background for breaking news, but it's not going to replace us. What AI does is it takes existing content and reformulates it. It doesn't think for us, and that's what the best journalists do. They apply a good level of thinking and judgment to investigation, narrative crafting, and more.
Like you mentioned before with the business model, there's always fears about newspapers shutting down, about budget cuts, about, politicians being critical of the media. So as the landscape continues to change, is there ever a fear in your mind about journalism dying off, or do you think it's a profession that'll be around forever?
I think it's a profession that will be around forever. People have needed the news, they've wanted the news since the beginning of time. It was delivered on horseback. It was delivered by town criers. It was delivered by carrier pigeons before. For most of the time I was growing up, it landed on my doorstep or showed up on the television. It doesn't matter what the platform is. I think that the world will remain hungry to know what's going on, and we still need to hold power accountable. And the rest of the community, the rest of the world needs us to do that.
Tower Talks will return for a full season in spring 2024. Be sure to follow us on social media at TSTV Tower Talks on X or Twitter, and at Tower Talks TSTV on Instagram. From all of us here in the studio, thank you for joining us this evening, and good night.